Oh yeah, I can open it. Okay. Well, good afternoon. I'm Robert Buxton, and it's great to be back here. It is so beautiful here. I just love coming here. So I play classical piano. I speak. I talk a lot, and we'll talk about the music and the background and what to listen for. And what it's almost become like a little tradition for me is I like to improvise in the beginning. Because improvisation, I think, is the missing link between composers of the past and performing today. Actually, in those days, composers like people like Chopin, Liszt, Beethoven, Mozart, they all improvised. And so I figure we should bring that back in classical music. It's not only for jazz, is what I'm saying, that classical musicians should improvise. So I haven't been doing that for very long, a couple years only now, that I've been doing a lot of improvising. So there are different ways to do it. I think last time I did some Christmas songs in the style of different composers, you told me. But today, it's a new year, kind of blank slate. I'm just gonna improvise out of, I don't know, just improvise. See what happens. Yeah. So out of thin air. So here we go. I don't know what that's called. It's not called anything because it just sort of happened. So now I'm going to play. This is something I have done for you before, but it's worth repeating, I think. Gluck, the composer Gluck. This is the melody from his opera Orpheus and Eurydice. And Gluck lived in the mid-18th century in Vienna, so he sort of precedes Mozart, and he was a big influence on Mozart. He was one of Mozart's principal influences, especially for opera. And that's mostly what Gluck wrote. So the story of Orpheus and Eurydice is a famous ancient Greek myth. Eurydice dies, she goes to the underworld, and Orpheus goes after her to bring her back to earth, to save her. He has his harp with him, and he plays the harp to charm the gods of the underworld. And by the way, this is why this myth has been so attractive for musicians, because it's a musical myth. Orpheus is a musician. The first opera in the 16th century was based on the Orpheus myth. The second opera, by Monteverdi, I think was the second. In other words, opera was born out of this myth of Orpheus. Anyway, Orpheus convinces Hades to let Eurydice go back with him. And Hades says, there's one condition, that you don't look back. You don't turn back. Same phrase in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, don't turn back. Unfortunately, Orpheus does turn back at the last moment and loses Eurydice forever. But that's the ancient Greek myth. It's a tragic myth. 1762, 63, when this was written, this opera, this was the age of enlightenment, and they had a more, let's say, optimistic view of humanity at that time, before the French Revolution, even, you know. So they changed the story. And in the opera, Eurydice comes back, and everybody lives happily ever after. And it's kind of nice that way, that they did that. But this piece is a lament. It's a mournful lament from Orpheus. It's an instrumental piece in the opera. It's a dance segment. It's from a section called Dance of the Blessed Spirits. And it's played by solo flute and strings accompaniment. So there are many arrangements of this beautiful melody. You have a violin version, and that's what attracted me to this, because I love the violin. I'm obsessed completely with the violin, but I'm too lazy to learn how to play it and switch. There's also this piano arrangement, which is very old-fashioned, which is what I like about it. And this is an arrangement by 19th century Italian composer Scambati. What a beautiful name, Scambati, you know. And this is the kind of thing that pianists would play 120, 130 years ago. It was more popular then than now. Rachmaninoff played this a lot, and there's a recording of him playing it, and it is just amazing. So anyway, here is the piece to start us off. Gluck Scambati melody from Orpheus and Eurydice.
Beautiful.
Thank you. This piece makes me think of something, the idea of how to listen to old music. That's 300 years old or so. And a lot of people ask me this question: how do I get classical music? I don't relate to it. And there's a few thoughts about that. That, first of all, I think that piece is universal, because the story is the loss of a loved one. Everyone has experienced that, unfortunately. And I think if you've lost a loved one, you get that piece, and that's really it. It's that simple. I also think you can imagine the idea of going to the underworld and trying to bring the person back. You could imagine a Jungian approach to that would be that, we all have dreams like that. If you had that, like you dream of a loved one and you feel like you can communicate with them and something like that. So, I have a story about this idea of how to understand the arts, So my mother is Russian. I grew up in New Jersey, and my mother has this wonderful group of Russian painter friends, Russian artists. And when I was 14 years old, we were at the home of one of these artists. He's an amazing painter named Anatoly Chernyshov. And I was looking at one of his paintings in his home. It was an abstract piece of art. And I was 14 years old. I was just looking at it. And I thought it was beautiful, but I was afraid that I didn't understand. I didn't have enough education to know what it was, And this other Russian artist, his name is Grisha, he's a big Russian guy, He comes up to me, he puts his arm around me, and he says, "It's beautiful, no?" And I said, "Well, how do I understand it?" And he looked at me, and he grabbed me and started to shake me. I thought that was my time. And he said, no, you have to look and feel. And I never forgot that, because I think that's it. And it reminds me, years later, I read a quote of Stravinsky, who was no lightweight as a musician, even as an intellectual. And he said, "I have not ever understood a bar of music in my life, but I felt it." So that's it. So my point is, trust yourself when you listen. And there's no, there's no wisdom that's sitting there that should tell you how you should feel about a piece of music. So anyway, that's just my little rant about that. I'm now going to go to the music of Schumann. The first of these I did for you before. The second is brand new, like last night finishing up new. And I've been working my way through Robert Schumann's Paganini studies. Perfect for a violin theme, because these are violin pieces originally by Paganini. And, Schumann did 2 sets of Paganini studies. The first set is more of a pedagogical set. It's like he's trying to take what Paganini wrote for the violin and accurately portray it on the piano. But the second set, which I'm playing from today, he takes more liberty with it. In other words, Schumann makes it his own here. Paganini was like Beethoven. He was half in the 18th century, half in the 19th century. And he pushed music in this new direction. He was a wild man, like a rock star of that time. And that was also in this time period. You had first the American Revolution, then the French Revolution, then the monarchies falling, Napoleon. It was all this one after another, upheavals. And Paganini and Beethoven are the musicians for that time. And then you have people like Schumann, born in 1810, the Romantics. And they idolized Paganini and Beethoven. They saw themselves in those composers. And Schumann heard Paganini in the 1830s, was blown away by it. He just set to work doing these arrangements. And I think that the arrangements, the 12 Paganini studies, which I'm going through each one, I think for Schumann it was instrumental, no pun intended, instrumental in finding himself. You find yourself through imitation, in other words. That's what he's doing here. And the first one I'm going to play in C minor. It's so Schumann. Oh, how are you? Yeah, coming. it's very, very Schumann in the sense that, Schumann had bipolar disorder. And they did not have therapy for it, the approach, the understanding that we have today. And this, led to a very tragic and difficult life for Schumann. And, I hear it in his music, the rapid changes of mood from depressive to manic. You hear it in this piece. And some people criticize Schumann for this. There's one person who said Schumann's music is like shish kebab. It's a piece of this, a piece of that, a piece of this. There's no unity. Well, but that's the point, I think. And I like shish kebab too, as it is, So that's what it is with Schumann. And Schumann even went so far as to create literary characters. He was a writer too. He was a brilliant writer and wanted to be a novelist at one point. He created characters to represent the two sides of his bipolar disorder. It's fascinating. Florestan was what he called the manic side, and Eusebius he called the depressive side. You hear both in this. Finally, another thing I've been reading about Schumann and bipolar disorder, most of his major works he wrote when he was in a manic phase. He wrote this in, I think, 1833, thereabouts. He wrote the Carnival, the famous Carnival. He wrote so many enormous pieces at this breakneck speed. This was a manic period. And then he would go into depressive periods and he would write hardly anything. He would just write exercises or fugues or something. Not that they're just fugues, I don't mean like that, but he would write substantially less. So that's Schumann. He's a fascinating character. He's very difficult to play, and he's difficult to connect to because he's so, it's so different from, say, Chopin. I love Chopin, but Chopin is more classical. He's more straightforward. He's more, Schumann's character and his life were so different from somebody like Chopin or Mozart. So I was reading, some writer said Schumann's music has the low risk to, or high risk to reward ratio, meaning very hard to learn and to play, and it doesn't sound really that hard. So that's, but I play it because I love this music so much. So here's the first of the Paganini Schumann studies I'll play today. So there's actually a guy. I think his name is Richard Kagan or Kagan. I may be wrong, but he's a concert pianist and a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. And his specialization, one of his specializations, is giving performances and scientific talks about Schumann. And it's very interesting if you can find some of that. And I've been, I don't have that kind of medical background at all that he has, but I know that I have a great grandmother who had bipolar disorder. And I talked to my dad about her. He was very close to her. That was his grandmother. And he was telling me that, sometimes one of the things he remembers about her, first of all, her warmth. I mean, he was just loved her and they were very close. But he said sometimes she would just talk incessantly, without stopping, without breaks even, without even a chance to breathe. Sometimes I feel like Schumann's music has that sense. Sometimes there's nowhere to breathe, actually. This next one is like that. It's like there's just, putting all of this emotion and everything into such a small space. This next piece, it's very tricky to play. It's the new one for me. It's pretty much those 16th notes, da 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 da, the whole time, from start to finish. And it would seem that that's just an exercise. On the surface, it is. On the surface, Paganini's caprices are exercises for the technique, but they're really not that. They're studies in expression, and they're studies in feeling. That's really what's kind of like the Russian painter story. It's the same thing. But at any rate, this idea of kind of babbling, that's what it reminds me of in this piece. And that's not to put Schumann or anybody who suffers from a condition like that in a negative light. It's even the opposite, because I find it's really fascinating, and I think everyone, no one is perfectly balanced or normal, whatever that means. And so we can relate to Schumann. Everybody has moods and phases and things that so anyway, that's how I view this next one. I also view it as very hard and very new. So, I wish you have some forgiveness to me. Yeah. So here's the next one. Paganini, Schumann, also. violinists. His name was Ivry Gitlis. And if you haven't heard his recordings and his talking, please do, because he's not as well known as he should be. Ivry Gitlis was a very unusual, very sui generis person. And I was thinking about what he said about Schumann. Ivry Gitlis was teaching some young students. He died only about 5 or 6 years ago, Ivry Gitlis, at the age of like 98 or 99 or something. Kept playing until he was that age, And the thing about studying classical music today, or in the last 50 years, the emphasis is on getting all the right notes. That's the emphasis, in general. It's an exaggeration, but I read an article recently by a pianist, Jonathan Biss, in the New York Times. I really liked what he said. He said, when John Coltrane played jazz, his goal was to communicate with God. When classical pianists play, our goal is to just get the right notes. and it's just it's so true that shouldn't be the goal. And so Ivry Gitlis said this. He was teaching some young students and trying to get them out of this mindset. And I'm still working on it, because I'm very much in that. I'm always, afraid, and you shouldn't be afraid. You should be, play with a big open heart and everything. Maybe I'm getting there. And Gitlis said, don't go for being a reliable musician. That's not the goal, purely. He said, do you think Schumann wrote music for a person who was simply reliable? And it's interesting to say that, because Schumann's music, you have to feel. Maybe I told this story last time, but I might as well tell again. There is a pianist, Walter Gieseking, a French-born German pianist. Preface to this is that he was not a good person. He was kind of a Nazi collaborator, not a good character. And this story also shows a not very good character, but there's a small grain of truth about Schumann here. So Walter Gieseking was giving a public lesson to a young boy, 10 years old or so. And the boy was playing Schumann. He finished the piece, and Walter Gieseking said, I want you to start it again, and then don't stop. Whatever happens, whatever I say or do not stop playing. Okay. So the boy was playing, and Walter Gieseking just starts shouting personal insults at the kid. And by the end of this performance, the boy he's like in tears, he's crying. And Walter Gieseking finally sits down, he smiles, he says, okay, only now are you in the right mindset to really be able to play Schumann. And that's a terrible way to get the point across, but explaining that you have to sort of put yourself in that volatile state. So anyway, now I'm going to play Brahms. I've done this here before. This is book 2 of Brahms's Paganini variations. A little bit longer than the other pieces today. And Brahms is a young man, and if you've heard this from me before, I'm sorry. I've been playing a lot of Brahms here. 3 months ago or 4 months ago, I played book 1 and told you this. But Brahms I think he was barely 20 years old in the 1850s. And he showed up to the Schumann's home in the Rhine Valley, Dusseldorf, I think, knocked on the door, and Clara, Robert's wife, who herself was a great musician, pianist, composer, she let him in, and he said, I've written all of this music, can I get some advice? He played the piano. She was blown away. Robert Schumann comes home later, and he said, you're a genius to young Brahms. And he said, furthermore, why don't you just live with us? Just stay. And they sort of adopted him almost. Times were different in the 1850s. Can you imagine that now? Some young kid says, I want some advice. Why don't you just live with me? Yeah. Now, Robert Schumann, shortly after, his mental health really deteriorated. And he jumped into the icy Rhine River. He was institutionalized. And in those days, they wouldn't even allow visitors. It's tragic. He was all alone in this asylum. I think Clara snuck in at the very end. And then Robert Schumann, he died at the age, I think, of 47 only. And all of this time, Brahms was there. He was helping the family out. Clara was pregnant with their 7th child, with Schumann. So, by the way, if Schumann had a very tortured life, he got one thing absolutely right. He was a wonderful husband and father. That's documented. So you see, that's why mental illness is not a stigma. It doesn't mean anything about character necessarily. So at any rate, there's a myth that comes out at this time in the 1850s that Brahms and Clara had a relationship, a romantic interest. And I don't think so. Clara was 20 years older than Brahms. But how could it be, with all of that going on and being pregnant with their seventh? I don't get it, and historians don't think it happened. But it's a sensationalized myth, just like the Mozart and Salieri story, which is completely fabricated. It's not true. I was listening to Salieri in the car a few weeks ago. He's a great composer, but yeah. So, this has been sensationalized. There's a movie from the 40s. No, it's okay. Right? It's a little tropical. I like it's a little Caribbean flavor, right? Calypso or something, yeah. So, no worries at all. I love little moments like that. So, so Brahms and Clara. There's a movie about this from the 40s with Katharine Hepburn playing Clara Schumann. And I love Katharine Hepburn. What an actress! But it's just that's Hollywood. It's not real history, So the truth is, though, they had some unrequited, unresolved feelings towards each other throughout the rest of their lives. Brahms ended up moving to Vienna. He picked up a big Slavic influence in Vienna. You right? Hungarian dances that came later. But he always had these feelings for Clara. And you can feel it in the letters that he wrote. You can feel it in his music, I think. But he never quite said it. He never quite... And I think that in a way, unrequited love can be even more powerful in the arts. Brahms was this kind of person, He was originally, he was from Hamburg in the far north of Germany. And that's a city not known for overt displays of emotion in its people. It's just, that's not the culture. You keep your emotion here, but it doesn't mean that there's no emotion there. And Brahms was like that. I think he's like that in his music, and I think he was like that with his feelings towards Clara. I mean, what is this right here? This is a 29-year-old writing this. That's so nostalgic. It's so, there's this feeling of like longing there, Those are a couple excerpts of Paganini variations. But anyway, this specific piece, most of it is sort of like the Schumann. They're exercises. That's what Brahms thought he was writing initially. He took the Paganini 24th Caprice and he just made these exercises. But then he realized that they were soulful music, and he decided, let's not call them exercises, let's just call them, a concert piece. So it's very difficult to play. Sent me to the orthopedist last summer when I was learning it. I mean, it's really... So here's book 2 of the Brahms Paganini variations with all that, backstory in mind. very tricky music. So now we're gonna switch the style a lot. We're gonna go to France, and I'm gonna play Debussy first. Claude Debussy. This is an arrangement of one of his songs, Beau Soir. It's also brand new for me to play. It's an early work, relatively early work of his. It's supposed to be sung in French, and I don't sing in French, so this is a solo piano arrangement of Daniel Héricourt, and I'll talk about him after the piece because I'll play something he wrote. That's a fascinating story about him. But so Claude Debussy, people refer to him as an impressionist composer, like the impressionist painters, Monet and Manet and Pissarro and, so many others. Debussy did not like that term, but I think it works because it shows a connection between that style of painting and music, and he's going, I would say, a little bit into abstraction, but not completely. And Debussy has his own unique style. He's one of the best of the best of the best composers. As my piano teacher, Vladimir Viardot, would always say, Debussy, everything he wrote is an A+. So, Beau Soir means beautiful evening. And as I understand, this is not exactly a love song. It's almost like symbolist poetry. It's more about the just describing a beautiful evening. And this was typical with the Impressionist painters. They would get out of the art studio, like Monet, he would go outside and paint outside. And this was a big change. And I think, in a way, the music is like this. I don't know if Debussy wrote outside, but still. So here's Beau Soir. It's pretty new for me. And it's also one of those pieces that doesn't sound that hard, but oh boy, is it. Yeah. So, here it is. Thank you. And there's a big difference between Debussy and Brahms, Debussy and Schumann. I think it's the language. The German language is more articulated, and whereas French, it's almost like you speak French as if there's a piece of baguette in your mouth. You know, bonjour, you know, there's Southerners who talk like this too. You know, it's like, well, you know, the lower half of the mouth is not like Shelby Foote, you know, and Ken Burns. So, and the music is like that too. It's just a little more murky. Now, Daniel Aricourt, who did that arrangement, I'm going to play one of his original pieces. Getting towards the end here. If you need to run, I know it's a little bit, I won't feel bad, but I'll go a little over here. Daniel Aricourt was born in France in 1903, and he knew Debussy well. He knew Ravel and many others. And at some point, he came to the U.S., I think in the late 1920s or early 30s, taught at several places, Indiana and a few other places, ended up teaching and living in Greensboro, North Carolina, UNCG for many years. See how good North Carolina is? He chose North Carolina over Paris. And so I'm friends with his widow, Jane Aricourt, who herself, she's a great pianist and a wonderful person. And she gave me a stack of her late husband's music, including that Debussy and this piece I'm going to play now. So it's just really fascinating to me to learn more of his music. You know, there's so many composers like this who are really worth playing, and they're not as well known as they should be. I think Daniel Aricourt is an example. So this piece is called Pièce en forme de rag. I don't think I've played it here yet, but it's very short. It's from the 1920s. So music in the 20s, classical music, took a very different tone because it was after the First World War. French music too. This piece is not like the Debussy at all. It's more dry and a little bit more terse. Think of Hemingway and how he writes like short sentences as if just from a typewriter. That's the style. And I was just thinking about that First World War and how it affected France. France lost 1/3 of its male population to that war. And I think that this music reflects that in a not so obvious way because it's a ragtime. It's based on ragtime. It's got some dissonant, abstract, some real, like almost abstract sounding chords, but it's not that out there as a 20th century piece, as a modern avant-garde piece. It's not that out there. But it's got this kind of like dryness to it that I associate with post-World War I music. I was talking on the phone to Jane Aricourt. I saw her this past Monday, and she was telling me that her late husband was in the First World War. He was very young at the time, but he was in the French army. So I couldn't believe it. It must have affected him. Now, he was very lucky. He played in the marching band. As a pianist, well, they made him play xylophone. It's better than what Woody Allen did and Take the Money and Run, playing the cello in a marching band. But anyway, so that must be part of it. My association or image for this piece is a cubist, Charlie Chaplin. And by the way, about associations, I love thinking of music from an associative point of view. Trust yourself if you have an association come up. This is like that thing I was saying about understanding the music, rather feeling it, rather to feel it than to understand. I was playing somewhere and a lady came up to me and she said, I played the Beethoven, the 32 variations in C minor. She came to me and she said, I had such a strong association, but I feel like it's incorrect to say it. And I said, why? I really want to hear. She said, well, I'm embarrassed. Like, please tell me what you... And she said, the whole time, it reminded me of popcorn. Popcorn popping. I could smell it. I could even taste it. I said, that is fascinating. Can I use that, please? It's wonderful. It just made some kind of association for her. It's the arts, after all. There's no wrong or right, really. So I love that kind of thing. So Cubist Charlie Chaplin, that's how I see this. Maybe you have a different image, and I'd love to hear it if you do. So here is the piece in the style of a ragtime by Daniel Aricourt from Greensboro, North Carolina. Thank you. A couple of things. Jane told me that Daniel Aricourt was a wonderful dancer. You can hear it. He was also very funny. I could tell from the piece, very humorous. And a final thought that this style of the arts in general in the 1920s in Paris, post-World War I, there's two words that come to mind for me. One is elegant, and the other is weird. And it's both. And I think that that's what it is. So now I'm going to shift gears and play a couple old-time gospel songs. Really out of the blue, right? So this is my background. I've maybe told you the same thing before, but I grew up in New Jersey. Anyone from New Jersey here? Yeah, no? Okay. That's a first for me. A lot of us are here now. I grew up in New Jersey, and I have two immigrant parents. I was the child of immigrants. My mother is an immigrant from the Soviet Union, and she raised me on classical music from a young age. And my dad is also an immigrant from Southern Virginia. And he raised me on gospel music and would always tell me, when are you going to learn some real music, Robert? So, or Bobby or Bubba or whatever he'd call me with that Southern thing. But here is a gospel song, Life is Like a Mountain Railroad. And I'm going to add a little New Orleans maybe to it. The New Orleans thing is not my dad's, music, but so yeah, here it is. Yeah. things. Now, that's got a little bit, I have to admit, of the three cousins from Louisiana who are no longer around. Jerry Lee Lewis, Mickey Gilley, and Jimmy Swaggart, who died recently. Jimmy Swaggart was a questionable, well, that's not, but, you know, but I love his piano playing. And when he died, I was listening to some of his piano playing. My wife doesn't really care for this kind of gospel music. She calls it boom chuck. She said, why do you have to do, everything has to be like that? And what's with those things, you know, but it's part of the style. And I was listening to Jimmy Swaggart, and she came, is that you? I said, no. She said, well, I could see you've ripped off a lot from him. And I said, well, don't tell anyone. So anyway, I want to close with a really upbeat gospel. This is more like the stuff my dad, you know, raised me on. This is Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, and I'm just going to play it. It's, you know, it's not going to have all that Jerry Lee stuff. So here it is. Maybe a little. Anyway, how's it go? I got stuck. Sometimes they sound, you know. Thank you. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and I will see you soon. I'd love to be back soon. So thank you for having me. Thanks. Shut this down. Look.